Judiciary Committee will please come to order, a quorum being present. Without objection, the Chair is authorized to declare recess at any time. Pursuant to Committee Rule 2 and House Rule 11, Clause 2, the Chair may postpone further proceedings today on the question of approving any measure or matter or adopting an amendment for which a recorded vote for the ayes and nays are ordered. Pursuant to notice, I now call up the Chair's resolution authorizing the issuance of certain subpoenas for documents and testimony for purposes of markup and move that the committee agree to the resolution. The clerk will report the resolution.
Resolution offered by Chairman Gerald Nadler. Resolved that upon the adoption of this resolution, the Chairman of the Committee on the Judiciary is authorized to issue subpoenas for the documents and testimony from current and former administration officials relating to the following. 1. The zero-tolerance policy and other family separation policies and practices. 2. Detention or short-term custody of children and/or families. And 3. Discussions about or offers of presidential pardons to Department of Homeland Security officials or employees. In addition, the Chairman, as his discretion, and
without objection, the resolution is considered as read and open for amendment at any point. I will begin by recognizing myself for an opening statement. Today, the Judiciary Committee will take additional important steps toward greater oversight of the Trump administration in two areas: immigration and alleged obstruction of justice. First, immigration. Over the past several months, we have held hearings and sent letters to the agencies of jurisdiction regarding a series of catastrophic and inhumane immigration policies. Many questions remain, and it is past time that we hold this administration accountable. In January, as one of my first acts as chairman, I sent letters to the then Department of Homeland Security DHS Secretary Nielsen, then Acting Attorney General Whitaker, and current Health and Human Services Secretary Azar, asking that they preserve and turn over any information and records pertaining to the development and execution of the administration's so-called zero tolerance, which really meant family separation, immigration enforcement policy, and the detention of migrants. I am pleased to say that DHS and HHS have, for the most part, complied with this request. However, in a span of 6 months, the Department of Justice has produced only a smattering of heavily redacted emails. And yet together, these documents represent the administration's most substantive response to the various immigration-related inquiries we have made this Congress. In April, we requested documents and information regarding troubling reports that the administration was considering retaliatory actions against certain members of Congress who the President deemed to be in opposition to his funding and policy priorities. That the President openly discussed this tactic on social media shocks the conscience. After sending a follow-up letter, we were told by agency officials that because these actions were never executed, there was no need for the disclosure of related documents or information. That, however, is for Congress to decide, not the administration, whether we need that information and those documents. In May 2019, along with several of my Judiciary Committee colleagues, I wrote to DHS demanding an immediate investigation into the deaths of 5 migrant children at the southern border over the last 6 months, as well as a committee member briefing on conditions in short-term holding facilities. Having been to El Paso twice this year, I was already aware that conditions were deplorable and unacceptable. And with the release of 2 DHS Office of Inspector General reports, my concerns have grown exponentially. To date, DHS has not provided a single briefing or any response to the letter. I use these examples to highlight the scope of serious concerns we have raised with the administration and the systematic withholding of information from the Congress, despite our oversight responsibility on behalf of the American people. We have given the administration ample time to respond to these serious reports of egregious conduct. This committee cannot sit idly by. There must be oversight and accountability. On that subject, in April 2019, along with Zoe Lofgren, chair of the Immigration and Citizenship Subcommittee, and Steve Cohen, chair of the Constitution, Civil Rights, and Civil Liberties Subcommittee, I sent a letter to Acting DHS Secretary Kevin McAleenan requesting information and documents related to President Trump's reported offer to pardon him if he were to illegally close the southern border, as the President had reportedly suggested he should do. A follow-up letter was sent on May 29th, but we have yet to receive any response to these inquiries. That matters because it represents a very serious threat to our rule of law system. And it brings me to the other group of subpoenas we are authorizing today. And let me just elaborate. For a president, now these are allegations and news reports, which we want to check out, for a president to order an administration official to violate the law and to say, don't worry, if you violate the law, I'll pardon you, would be a terrible dereliction of duty and a terrible violation of the president's duty to see that the laws are faithfully executed. Be an open invitation to violate the laws. And this brings me to the other group of subpoenas we are authorizing today. These 12 subpoenas relate to the committee's ongoing investigation into allegations of obstruction of justice, public corruption, and abuses of power, including such conduct described within the scope of the Mueller report. The special counsel, who will be appearing before this committee next week, found in his report that the Russian government attacked the 2016 U.S. presidential election in, quote, sweeping and systematic fashion, unquote. The report also detailed 10 instances of possible obstruction of the investigation of that most serious matter, as well as other possible misconduct. The Committee on the Judiciary has a constitutional obligation to investigate credible allegations of misconduct. We have been doing that through pursuing the unredacted Mueller report and key related witnesses and documents. There is no substitute, however, for primary evidence as the committee makes its decisions, which is why we have sought documents and testimony from former White House counsel Donald McGahn, former White House Communications Director Hope Hicks, and former Deputy White House counsel Annie Donaldson. Today we focus on 12 additional witnesses. These include government officials who worked or continue to work in close proximity to the president. These witnesses also include those outside of government who have critical information in connection with our investigation. We will not rest until we obtain their testimony and documents so that this committee and Congress can do the work that the Constitution and the American people expect of us. I now recognize the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee, the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Collins, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And here we go again on another round and episode of premature subpoena authorizations, brought to you by the Democrats on the House Judiciary Committee. Aside from the lack of specificity, the lack of a lot of things, and the lack of maybe a law school understanding of a subpoena, this is again another trek down an empty road. In the world of congressional oversight, today's markup makes absolutely no sense. First, we have the zero tolerance policy. This is an area where the chairman has sent one single request to the administration way back on January 11th, 6 months ago, and not a single follow-up request since. Nevertheless, since the administration has produced a steady stream of documents, the Department of Health and Human Services made a total of 20 productions, nearly one per week, for over 7,500 pages. Department of Homeland Security has made over 4 productions, including one earlier this week, amounting to over 3,300 pages, as you can see in the boxes beside me. The Department of Justice has provided 6 productions, totaling over 1,200 pages. In sum, the administration has voluntarily made 29 productions, totaling over 12,000 pages, yet the chairman, out of the blue and without a single formal follow-up, wants to issue subpoenas for more documents. Second, the chairman wants to issue a subpoena for information regarding the detention of children and families and a subpoena for information about the discussions or offers of presidential pardons to DHS officials and employees. The chairman has only tangentially issued a document request regarding detention way back in January. A subpoena here is not only premature but unjustified. The chairman has zero predicate for this markup today. Given this fact, I guess the chairman was telling the truth when he said during an earlier subpoena authorization he views the subpoena as the beginning of a dialogue process. Third, the chairman wants to continue a subpoena binge and issue additional 12 subpoenas to individuals related to the Mueller investigation. The chairman has made no formal contacts with 3 of these individuals during his chairmanship, and the subpoena will in fact be, I guess as we've heard, the beginning of a dialogue process. Once again, I want to emphasize, the chairman has not sent even one written request to 3 of the individuals on this list we are authorizing. 4 of the individuals were part of the chairman's short-lived and now defunct investigation into the 81 Trump associates. Each of these individuals responded to the chairman, cooperated with his inquiry before that investigation seemingly has died on the vine. Incredibly, another one of these individuals has already received a subpoena from the chairman. He produced documents as well, but I guess the chairman is going to reward him with yet another subpoena because apparently the first one wasn't good enough. I guess there wasn't enough dialogue. Again, the record is devoid of any basis for subpoena authorizations. At least the chairman is consistent. This is a pattern we have seen several times before. If you cooperate with him, you get a subpoena. If you ignore him, he'll leave you alone. In the world of congressional oversight, these subpoenas make no sense at all. But in the world of politics, today's markup makes perfect sense. When we left for the July 4th recess, my friends on the other side were reeling. they were having a very large and very public inter-party squabble over funding for humanitarian crisis at the border. The crisis this committee has repeatedly failed to address. Before we ever get back to town, however, we were greeted by the chairman's intention to go on a subpoena binge, attempting to change the narrative to focus on issues he hasn't touched for months, if at all. This is a very haphazard way of conducting congressional oversight. It's no wonder other committees have taken the lead on investigating the issues the chairman wants to focus on today. The Judiciary Committee, as it has been for months, is trying to play catch-up. For example, Chairman Cummings issued subpoenas to DHS, HHS, and DOJ regarding zero tolerance policy back in February, 5 months ago. HPSI has been consistently leading the way in regard to the Mueller investigation. One of today's subpoenas is for Michael Flynn, a person HPSI is close to bringing in after issuing him a subpoena last month. In addition, the chairman refused for months to review the lesser redacted Mueller report and held the Attorney General in contempt. Meanwhile, Adam Schiff cut a deal with the department and got access to the underlying documents. If the goal is truly to get information or testimony, our chair is failing. But as is repeatedly said, if the goal is to political theater, we're winning. Chairman Schiff also threatened to subpoena special counsel before the July break. He fulfilled his promise and in doing so forced the chairman's hand. Now, instead of having hearing where all of our members get to ask Robert Mueller questions, we're having our legs cut out from under us by limiting the questions. Not all Republican members will be able to ask questions, and not all Democrat members will be able to ask questions. This is an odd format, is the result of the chairman's not taking seriously this information and moving forward, and we're all here to suffer. In fact, let me just bring up, it's against House rules, but that's another problem we've never had a problem with here, it seems like, in the last 6.5 months. And the Democrat member of this committee are not happy about it. Today's subpoena binge is an effort to change the narrative. It's a show of force. It's a chance for the chairman to prove to his rank and file and the rest of the Democratic caucus that we can be tough on the Trump administration after being pushed around for 6 months. Today is a chance to show that we have what it takes and will not bow in the spotlight. However, the truth is at this point, next week, a hearing on one of the largest, most talked about investigations in 2 years, and this committee got rolled. Intel Committee gets to ask all their questions. This committee does not. This committee gets to divide in the haves and the have-nots. We're all elected, both sides. This is a farce, especially when it flies in the face of a 5-minute rule that is conveniently being ignored. Here we go again, and as I've had to say for the past 6.5 months, let the show begin.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. Without objection, all other opening statements will be included in the record. I now recognize myself for purposes of offering an amendment in the nature of a substitute. The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to a resolution offered by Mr. Nadler. Strike all after the resolving clause and insert the following. That upon the adoption of this resolution, the chairman of the committee...
Without objection, the amendment in the nature of a substitute will be considered as read and shall be considered as base text for purposes of amendment. I will recognize myself to explain the amendment. My amendment in the nature of a substitute makes no substantive changes to the resolution and simply makes a technical revision to former Attorney General Sessions' name as stated in the resolution. Therefore, I urge adoption of the amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time. I now recognize the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee, the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Collins, for any comments he may have on the amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have no real comments about the amendment in the nature of a substitute, except the the broadness of this, the lack of specificity of this, the understanding of looking at it and saying, what do we want? And also, as I stated in my opening statement, we're here again for show. This committee has become run by press release when we can't do substantive work. This is not the way subpoenas are supposed to work. This is not the way congressional oversight is supposed to work. And for those of us who hope to be in the majority again one day, quit running it for the rest of us. Because this is not the way subpoenas are supposed to work and oversight is supposed to happen. There's been no follow-up on many of these. Some of these have never even gotten the first request for even helpful. And the ones who have responded are now getting served with another subpoena. Wow. Let's keep going. I yield back.
Are there any amendments to the amendment in the nature of a substitute? In that case,
Mr. Chairman, move to strike last word.
the gentleman from Ohio.
Thank you,
What purpose
Mr.
does the
Chairman.
gentleman from Ohio seek recognition?
Move to strike last word.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, despite the fact that millions and millions of taxpayer dollars and 22 months were spent on an investigation and a report that determined that there was no collusion by the Trump campaign with Russia, and the Attorney General concluded that there was no obstruction of justice, the majority continues on what clearly is a fishing expedition. Yet more subpoenas here today. I agree completely with the ranking member. This is much ado about wasting this committee's time and avoiding other issues which are within our jurisdiction, which we continue to avoid. It's really a faux impeachment, a fake impeachment to satisfy the hardcore Democrat base who hate this president, who despise the fact that he's still in the White House and in fact, despise the fact that he was ever there. Now this committee has allowed itself, as the ranking member said, to be rolled, run over, roughshod by the Intelligence Committee. It's really embarrassing for a committee that really has had significant stature in this House for so many years. Rather than wasting more time on this fishing expedition, we could be spending our time on things that really matter, on things that would actually benefit the American people. For example, we had nearly 250,000 people enter our country, flow into this country at our southern border over the last 2 months alone. Think of that, 250,000 people in 2 months. And most of those came in through our very flawed asylum process, which we ought to be able to come to some bipartisan agreement if we actually talk about it, discuss it, have hearings on that issue. It's so flawed. We have people that are paying drug cartels to come here. The money's flowing back there. When these people are coming in at one point, people are literally coming down. You can watch TV. They're coming down loaded with drugs in boxes right down the way from that because our border is so unprotected at this point and putting the American people at risk. That's something, immigration, asylum, et cetera, is within the jurisdiction of this committee. But we essentially ignore that over and over again. And as I said, the cartels are making huge amounts of money at this. This is putting American people at risk. We had 70,000 people who died of drug overdoses last year. 70,000 people, drug overdose, most of it opioids, much of it fentanyl, for example. That issue is essentially ignored by this committee. Those people, by the way, when they come here, they're told the so-called magic words by the cartels, again, who are making the money. They come into the country. They're given a court date 2 to 5 years down the road. About 10% actually show up for the court date. The other 90% or so completely ignore it. They're put on a bus. They're put on a bus or a plane, shipped off to some place in the country, our congressional districts here, and they essentially disappear in the population. And that photo, which I think a lot of us really it hit us, that father and that young child that died, that drowned coming into our country. A horrible incident, never should have happened. But we should not forget that our policies, as they remain, or our lack of policy, lures these people to our country. The young women, the mothers and fathers who literally give birth control to knowing that their daughters, there's a reasonably good chance that they're going to be raped by the coyotes or the other people that are bringing them up here. So it's just horrific. That's the kind of stuff that we ought to be dealing with, but instead, more subpoenas, more wasting this committee's time. It's really a shame. This committee ought to be better than this, has been in the past, hopefully will be in the future, and I yield back.
For what purpose is the gentlelady from Texas seek recognition? Use your mic. Gentlelady's recognized.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, just a little chronological history. Let me acknowledge the importance of this subpoena on a number of bases. But my friends on the other side of the aisle, and certainly those who are here in 2013, remember that the brunt of what we're facing today falls at the very feet of this House and the Republicans. Because in 2013, there was a bipartisan bill that came to the House from the Senate, 68-32, led by John McCain. I think even Chairman Graham was on the bill, and now Chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee. And that was to address the problems of the American people as it relates to immigration. It was a pathway to citizenship. And the members of this House, Democrats, were prepared to work with the bill. We had a bill. and we were prepared to work with the bill and then go to conference. But the Republicans didn't want to answer the call of the American people, fix the broken immigration system. Now, I've just come back from the border, and I can assure you that children are still being separated from their families. Children are still being housed, and the reason why they are housed as children labeled unaccompanied, because I asked the question, did they become unaccompanied because you separated them from their families? Yes, that's how they became unaccompanied. And so it is important to note the zero policy is still effectively undermining what I think the American people are most outraged about, is the care and responsibility for these children. Now, if you go and talk to migrants one-on-one, they will tell you that, as they were told me, their son was murdered. They went to the grocery store and came back and saw their nieces and nephews drugged by someone who had broken into their house, and they had to escape with their life. These are migrants who are on the other side of the border in Juarez. The policy that the president says that is working, I have no quarrel with the Mexican government. They did whatever they had to do diplomatically. But there are no work permits. There are no facilities that these migrants are supposed to stay in. They have no guarantee that they won't be thrown out into the street because there are no places for them to stay. There's no health care. And yes, they are human beings. So it is important for us to be able to utilize our authority, our oversight responsibility, to ensure that the Flores case is adhered to, that there is a short-term custody. Now we understand that there's a massive 700 per child day private prison being built somewhere with no authority from the United States Congress, wasting money, reprogramming, taking money. But yet they couldn't take money, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member. They couldn't take money to answer the call for toothpaste and toothbrushes. They couldn't reprogram the money in the DHS. They continued to whine about the Congress was not responding. That's not accurate. Our hearts were torn. The American people are torn. They're concerned about these children. It is crucial for us to respond to them. And then to be able to deal with the litany of individuals from Mr. Dearborn to Flynn to Jody Hunt, and Mr. Kushner, Kelly, Lewandowski, Porter, Rosenstein, Mr. Sessions, Mr. Davison, and Mr. Howard, Dylan Howard, and Pecker, to be able to continue the oversight that is the responsibility of this committee, because the American people are asking to be informed in a way that they can understand the enormity of what has occurred in this administration. We may soon hear an announcement about the census in complete contrary to the Supreme Court decision. This administration will stand up to the Supreme Court and tell them that they are not worthy of their name and begin to issue executive orders on the question of citizenship, on the census. So I don't have any doubt that this subpoena is for non-political purposes. It is for purposes of information, and it certainly is for purposes of dealing with the important question of the responsibility of this Judiciary Committee. And finally, I would argue the point that Office of Pardons and questions regarding Homeland Security officials are important, inasmuch as, Mr. Chairman, they are announcing raids that are going to frighten everybody and maybe put everyone in danger and separate more children from families again. I think that it is important that we move forward with this resolution for subpoena. With that, I yield back.
For what purpose is the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very quickly, since this is about the subpoenas, let me just first respond. There is, and I'm glad to see my friends on both sides of the aisle, or other side of the aisle, have joined us on this side of the aisle in acknowledging there is a crisis on our border. We have been battling while in the majority. We had a few join the Democrats that didn't want to secure the border, but the failure to secure the border is what has caused this crisis. The failure to, the promises of legalization, amnesty, better living conditions, all these kind of things have continued to lure more and more people here. Now, if we didn't have immunity in Congress, then you could have the survivors of those who have died trying to get here, or the hundreds of thousands potentially that have been personally harmed, raped on the way here, maybe millions. They would have lawsuits against members, but we have immunity. But we know in our evolved system of justice that if you have, for example, a swimming pool in your yard and you fail to put a fence around it or a wall around it, and somebody comes in and is harmed, drowned, they have a potentially major verdict they're going to get against the individuals who refuse to put a wall or a fence around an attractive nuisance. That's the legal term, not mine. That's what has been created by our friends across the aisle, an attractive nuisance that has lured people to their death, to horrible living conditions. And then when this administration is begging for beds to take care of these people, we were told that the crisis created by the refusal to secure our border didn't exist. Oh, it's a manufactured crisis. It doesn't exist. And so I'm glad at least we now have those people that stuck their head in the sand and said there was no crisis, now acknowledging that there is a crisis. But let's be real about what created it and what will solve it, and continuing to encourage people to come from around the world in greater numbers than ever is not the fix. Now, with regard to these subpoenas, if I put my role and robe back on as a judge or chief justice and think about, because that's the way you have to look at these things, will a federal court enforce the subpoenas? You would want to see, what was the process? What is this about? Well, it's about the Mueller report. Well, what did you do? Well, we first subpoenaed Barr because we said it was a summary. He said it was just to get out the conclusions because he knew the report was coming. But we subpoenaed him, even though that's totally irrelevant if you want to know what the report said. And then we finally got around to having an agreement for Mueller to come testify. But I'm telling you, if you had told me 6 months ago that Chairman Schiff would be able to marginalize the Judiciary Committee and Chairman Nadler, I would say that will never happen. I found otherwise. Our committee has been rolled on our jurisdiction over special counsel. That is our jurisdiction. The members on both sides of the aisle ought to all be able to ask questions and not be marginalized by the chairman of the Intelligence Committee. But we got rolled. And so if you're the court looking to see, because about the only other way to enforce a subpoena and a contempt, it would be if you arrest them and put them in our little cell up here. But otherwise, you got to get a federal court on board here with you. And when they see the process that's been followed here, it doesn't make sense. It makes it clear. Maybe this subpoena is an effort to make it look like we're trying to get back our jurisdiction from the Intelligence Committee. But whatever the case, this is going to damage future majorities, regardless of which side of the aisle. It is a terrible precedent. And that's why these subpoenas should not be coming now. Instead, we ought to be demanding full time to question Mueller about the report, then issue subpoenas if necessary for the witnesses that make up that report if we're not satisfied with Mueller. That would impress a judge, and short of that, these subpoenas will be meaningless. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
I move straight to the last word.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I can't start without just making clear what everyone on this committee knows, what everyone in America knows. The United States of America is not an attractive nuisance. The United States of America is a beacon of hope and opportunity to people around the world, as it has been since our founding. Now, I strike the last word to speak out strongly in support of the subpoena authorization. I would expect bipartisan support for these authorizations. First, for the list of individuals related to the committee's investigation into obstruction of justice, public corruption, and other abuses. I've heard many times from my Republican colleagues on the other side of this dais that they don't want expert witnesses. They want the people who were there. Well, this list should satisfy them. These are the key players, both in our ongoing investigation and in the Mueller report. That's exactly what my Republican friends have been asking for. Up to this point, unprecedented obstruction by the White House has blocked testimony and appearances by the people who were there. But we will not stop in the face of baseless claims of immunity or privilege. I thank the chairman for his continued work in pressing this committee's work forward, and I hope that the minority will join us as we continue this important investigation. Secondly, this authorization also authorizes subpoenas for information related to the detention or short-term custody of children and or families by the Trump administration. That's the administration whose policy dictated tearing kids from their parents. It's the same administration that has put kids in cages. Mr. Chairman, in the days before the committee's February 26th hearing on immigrant detention, the administration dumped thousands of pages of documents on the committee. Within those pages, we found reports of incidents of sexual assault and misconduct involving unaccompanied children in the care of the Office of Refugee and Resettlement. Those incidents included 154 staff on unaccompanied minor allegations of sexual assault. And now this week, NBC News reported new allegations against Customs and Border Protection agents. A 16-year-old boy alleged that the sleeping mats were removed from his cell after he complained about the drinking water. A 15-year-old girl alleged that she was sexually assaulted by a CBP officer when he groped her in what was meant to be a routine pat-down. While some of these incidents are reportedly under investigation by DHS's Office of Inspector General, they demand full congressional oversight and swift accountability. We cannot stand by and hope that the Trump administration does the right thing, because time and time again, they do not. And it is children who are paying the price. Kids. Innocent kids. We've seen it with our own eyes. Many of us have seen the conditions these children are kept in, from Texas to my own state of Florida. We cannot stand by and think that the Inspector General will just simply handle it. We can't stand by and wait for a response to our multiple letters. This is urgent. We cannot stand by and ignore our duties as an independent branch of government. And, Mr. Chairman, we absolutely cannot stand by and allow human rights to be violated beneath the American flag. If the administration is going to continue its unprecedented obstruction, we will continue to respond. Today, we authorize an important step forward in providing oversight of an administration that simply must be reined in. I thank the chairman for his leadership, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Arizona seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move to strike the last word.
Gentlelady is recognized.
You know, Mr. Chairman and members, I am absolutely disgusted by the obsession that is going on here of trying to undermine the President of the United States. And, you know, and then to hear that, you know, the Republicans aren't doing anything about immigration. Are you freaking kidding me? I mean, we have immigration bill after immigration bill that members have submitted and are in front of this committee that have not even been heard that could help solve this problem. And then I'm really irritated that next week we're going to be questioning Robert Mueller, and I don't even get a chance to question him. This is just plain wrong. I've been elected just like anybody else here, and for the leadership in this committee to decide that only certain members, and there's only time for certain members to be questioned, even on your side of the aisle, is just plain wrong. And I yield back my time.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentlelady from California. For what purpose does the gentlelady from California seek recognition?
Mr. Chair, I move to strike the last word.
Gentlelady's recognized.
Let me just begin by saying that I think for the last several years, until January of this year, the Republicans controlled the presidency, the Senate, the House, and comprehensive immigration reform was not passed. Earlier this year, there was a child welfare case in California involving the abuse and captivity of 13 children. The parents were charged with abusing and imprisoning the children, only allowing them to eat once a day and to shower infrequently. These parents are serving life in prison for their crimes against their children. Today, the Department of Homeland Security is imprisoning children in crowded cells for extended periods of time without adequate food, supervision, medical attention, or access to basic hygiene needs like soap, toothpaste, and toothbrushes. Children are suffering in detention from the flu, chickenpox, and measles. In every state in this country, this is child abuse, child neglect, medical neglect. A state child welfare agency would remove the children from these conditions and arrest the parents. By the way, it's never routine for an adult male to pat down a female child. That is never routine. We cannot tolerate state-sponsored child abuse. The Department of Homeland Security says they don't have the money to treat the children better. We provided $4.6 billion to address the humanitarian crisis at the border and specifically said that the money could not be spent to build additional detention centers. Yet DHS is expanding for-profit immigration detention centers in states far from our southern border. They found money to expand for-profit detention centers, but somehow they don't have the money to provide soap, toothbrushes, and medical attention for children. John Kelly, President Trump's former chief of staff and Secretary of Homeland Security, during the Family Separation Pilot Program, now serves on the board of the company that was handed a $341 million no-bid contract to run the Homestead Center, an influx detention center for children. The company that runs the center charges $775 per day per child, yet children in detention have access to only the most basic services and then oftentimes not. There are foster parents in this country who don't get $775 a month to care for a child. The untold story of this debacle is the corrupt windfall of dollars that businesses are making. In February of 2018, I received reports in my office that a large number of infants and toddlers were sent to the Office of Refugee Resettlement Services. These are services designed for older children who typically arrive at the United States border alone. We couldn't understand how infants and toddlers were crossing the border alone. They weren't coming alone. They were stripped from the protective arms of their family when they crossed the border together. More than 2,500 children were separated from their families under the administration's zero-tolerance policy. The administration said that this policy was ended, but it was not ended. Children are still being separated from grandparents, from aunts, uncles, siblings, and in whose world are these not families? It is a lie that the administration ended this policy of breaking up families. This is about punishing children and families so they can send a message back to their Central American countries to not come to the United States. CBP agents don't have adequate training to determine whether a child is abused, and there are no clear standards for what criminal convictions constitute a danger to a child. There is no due process and no judge to determine the best interests of children at the border. We are using law enforcement to address a humanitarian crisis. I have been to refugee camps in South Sudan and Uganda. Children are never separated from their parents. What is going on at the border is an embarrassment to our nation. There is a crisis at the border, a crisis that has been fueled by an administration that refuses to address the root causes. Why do people leave their countries? Dollars should go to help the Central American countries, not cut aid. We need these subpoenas to get all the facts about family separation policy and to get the facts about how agencies are awarding contracts. The administration hasn't responded to our letters, And we now need subpoena authority to end the unconscionable treatment of children, immigrants, and asylum seekers. Thank you. I yield back my time, which has expired.
I thank the gentlelady. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The hypocrisy in this room today is staggering. To accuse the dedicated men and women who serve our nation in the Border Patrol as child abusers is simply despicable. They are doing everything they can under the most difficult of circumstances to provide for the needs of these children who have been brought here illegally, in large part in response to the promises of free health care, free legal representation, even being shielded from deportation after committing crimes in this country. To equate our Border Patrol to child abusers, I think just goes beyond the pall. And to hear claims of kids in cages under Trump. I'd bring to the majority's attention the report yesterday in the New York Post, which pointed out the Democrats on the House Oversight Committee sent out a pair of tweets Wednesday and earlier this month with photos of migrants sleeping in a detention center to publicize an immigration hearing in Capitol Hill. Just one problem. The pics were snapped in 2014 during the Obama administration. The Dems deleted the two messages and claimed it was an error. I think a lie would be more appropriate. Mr. Chairman, this is a committee that has been chaired in the past by giants of our history, men like James Buchanan, Daniel Webster. When we speak of an abuse of power, I think the real abuse of power is right here before us today. 12,000 pages of material have already been produced for this committee. I wonder if we've even read them. 3 of the 12 subpoenas are of people for whom we have not requested any information yet whatsoever. When the subpoena process is abused to this extent, it cheapens the moral and legal authority of all subpoenas of the House and the moral standing and authority of the Judiciary Committee that it may well very need to summon in the future. In fact, I think our stature has already been diminished and compromised. We've seen that already, the dramatic truncating of our legitimate authority to question the special counsel. This committee has already been eclipsed, I think precisely because of the way it has comported itself, and that's obviously a decision that's been made by the Democratic leadership. The executive and legislative are separate and co-equal branches. They cannot interfere with the internal functions of the other. And the frivolous and indiscriminate abuse of the House's subpoena power can only be interpreted as an attempt to interfere with the executive's function by tying down key officers with unlimited demands to produce paperwork. And this is not a new issue. Congress has tried to do the same thing to Truman, Eisenhower, Johnson, Carter, both Bushes, Clinton, and Obama, with the same results. And the courts consistently backed the presidency. The Congress even tried to subpoena Truman and his subordinates after they left the White House, and the courts said the same immunity applies. If this is an impeachable offense, then I think every president since I was born would have been impeached. Many of the I think the Democrats on this committee are suffering from what the Air Force calls target fixation. That's the phenomenon when pilots focus so much on the target that they fly their plane into a mountain. Many of their candidates in Trump districts ran as self-described problem solvers. Instead, I think people are seeing they're not problem solvers, but troublemakers, and they're the ones who are going to be most likely held to account. The first calls for Trump's impeachment came 1 week after the 2016 election. Our chairman was caught openly plotting impeachment just days after the 2018 election put him in charge of the Judiciary Committee. Mr. Chairman, democracy depends on the willingness of all sides to accept the result of an election. And that didn't happen this time, and that's a very dangerous phenomenon in a nation like ours. And meanwhile, the violent crime rate's rising. We have a crisis on the border, all matters that are under the jurisdiction of the Judiciary Committee. and all matters that have been unaddressed by the Judiciary Committee. In fact, to make matters worse, we just passed 3 bills out of committee last month to grant amnesty for millions of illegal aliens already in our country, which is sure only to attract more to attempt the dangerous and illegal crossing into our southern border.
Would the gentleman yield for a moment?
I'm
Would the
happy
gentleman
to
yield for a moment?
all of the time that
Would the
I
gentleman
have
yield for a moment? Thank you. I just want to agree with the gentleman that this committee has in the past been chaired by giants, but I would hardly consider James Buchanan.
Empezar, we're going to get started. We're going to try to do both English and Spanish as much as possible. Vamos a tratar de hacer en inglés y en español para todos los medios. Mi nombre es Moni Ruiz Velasco. My name is Moni Ruiz Velasco. I'm the director of PASO, the West Suburban Action Project. I'm also the president of the board of the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights. Soy Moni Ruiz Velasco, soy abogada y soy la directora de PASO. Buenos días. Estamos aquí hoy porque sabemos que la administración de Trump está amenazando a nuestras comunidades otra vez. So we're here today because the Trump administration is threatening our communities again.